Let's talk about inflation and the federal government response to it, because what the government is doing about inflation in this year 2022 is absolutely harmful to many Americans in the economy and is going to lead us to a path of economic ruin. So the things we got to understand about inflation, to simplify, we got supply, we got demand, and we got the money supply. Now, we got to think why this inflation has occurred. Okay, so one of the reasons would be an increase in the money supply. Since the U.S. federal government has increased its spending, increased its borrowing, increased its printing of new dollars, I believe 50% of the current money supply has been printed within the past 2 years since the pandemic, massive blowout of pandemic spending and the huge government deficit then. You would just have everything costing a little bit more, say 5% more, 8% is about what the inflation was, 11% since the beginning of the pandemic. So because of the money supply, you just have things cost more, and that's going to harm people because their salaries don't go up by the same exact amount. Their social security checks don't go up by the same exact amount. Okay, so that's just your regular money supply inflation. Definitely a bad thing. However, if you are a worker who can jump ship and go to another company and get yourself a raise, well, you could potentially ameliorate that inflation for yourself. Okay, then we have the other driver of inflation, which would be supply and demand. So we think about this. Has demand gone up? Because if the demand would go up, then the price would go up. No, the demand has not exactly gone up. We haven't had a huge increase in people in the United States, in our population. It's not something like that. It is, in fact, the supply, the available supply, that has gone down. And that would largely be attributable to the closing of factories and the closing of ports in China itself. Honestly, as Americans, we get so many of our goods from China. And so a disruption in the supply chains from China is, of course, going to drive the price of certain goods through the roof. And we see this in a wide variety of industries. So our real problem with inflation is a decrease in the supply of actual stuff, goods, things we want to buy and consume. Semiconductors would be a perfect example of that. Majority of the world's semiconductors are created in Taiwan. When Taiwan was closed for shipping, we weren't able to get any semiconductors. Well, that's going to raise the price of everything that uses semiconductors. That's going to decrease the supply of everything that uses semiconductors. That's why new car inflation is through the roof. And because new car inflation is through the roof, people want to buy used cars instead. And that's why the used car prices are through the roof. So the real problem with inflation is twofold. It's a decrease in the supply of goods, and it's an increase in the money supply. So that is the true problem, right? That is the true problem. And that's why people are upset with the Biden administration, because inflation is too dang high. And that's why Biden is going to suffer at the polls. And so Biden knows this. He doesn't want to get voted out. He doesn't want the Democrats to get destroyed in the next election. And so he says to himself, I need to bring down inflation, because that's what people are mad about. And it's true. People are mad about inflation. He should bring down inflation. But look at how they're trying to bring down inflation. All they have done is increased the Fed interest rate. The Fed being the lender of last resort, this is the interest rate that the Fed would give to other private banks. They borrow from the Fed, then they use that money to lend out and, conduct new projects. Lend that money out to you, in a mortgage or something like that. What this is going to do is drive the economy into recession, because businesses will not be able to get financing nearly as easily as they were in the era of cheap money, basically. And so this is going to make it harder for businesses to operate. This is going to drive up the unemployment level. And Jerome Powell, I think former Fed chair, I think Janet Yellen's the Fed chair right now, Jerome Powell has admitted this, that they would need to see a higher degree of unemployment. 6% unemployment for 5 years or 10% unemployment for 1 year in order to drive down inflation. But think to yourself, how exactly would that drive down inflation? Oh, it's because people couldn't afford to buy stuff. God, the problem is that people can't afford to buy things. If you then make a certain portion of them unemployed, so they can't afford to buy stuff, you haven't solved the problem. You haven't solved the problem at all. People will still be struggling to pay their bills and afford the things that they need because they don't have a job now. So solving inflation by decreasing demand is backwards and asinine and misguided, foolish, dumb, idiotic, moronic to the extreme. What needs to be done to bring down inflation is to increase the supply of goods and to decrease the money supply. So we got to stop printing so much money, and we got to make it easier for us to refine oil, to import oil, and to build houses. So we need to increase the supply, not decrease the demand.